Hello, everyone. My name is Becky Robinson, and I am so thrilled to be with my friend Mark Miller again as he prepares for the launch of his new book, Win Every Day. Welcome, Mark.
Well, Becky, it's great to see you again.
It is good to see you too. Now, people are starting to come online, and I see they're coming in fast and furious. We want to make sure that everyone gets in before we start our content. So maybe everyone can take a moment to locate the chat. We would love to hear where you're calling in from today, where in the world you're calling in from. If you happen to be with a group at your organization, we would love to hear about that also. And Mark, maybe you can give us a little bit of context for what we're looking at today.
Well, I am in a restaurant simulator at our corporate support center for Chick-fil-A here in Atlanta. So we're not doing any training in here today, so we decided to grab the space for this webinar.
Well, I think you're going to be making everyone hungry today, Mark, including, well, not me. I did have good lunch, but it's so good to see you in your home environment there at the Chick-fil-A headquarters. A few other notes for folks as we're getting started. We are broadcasting live today on Facebook. So if you would like to share this content with your friends and colleagues and others, you can go over to Facebook and you can quickly share this feed from the Weaving Influence page on Facebook out to all of your connections, and we would be grateful to you for that. Welcome to many of you who are coming in from around the country. It looks like we have some folks in Orlando at Crew, some folks at a public library in Cameron, Texas. We've got some Canadians on the line from Toronto, and all of those welcomes are coming in so fast I can't read and acknowledge them all, but we are grateful for your interest and participation. A few other notes, we are having a conversation today, so we will not have any slides up. You're only going to get to look at Mark's mug and mine, and we will welcome you throughout today's event to put your comments, questions, and such into the chat, and as time allows, we will address those. The good news is, though, that this is a series of webinars with Mark Miller. This is the first of 3, and so we will hope that you'll sign up for all 3. They will each have unique content, and so you'll have more opportunities to learn from Mark. So we're going to get started in just a moment. I'll just give a little bit of introduction to Mark. Mark, I feel like sometimes you don't need an introduction with this crowd. I'm betting there are a lot of friends on the line. Now, if you have never been exposed to Mark or his work or his books, would you go ahead in the chat and tell me the word new to Mark? I would love to know if you are new to Mark. I'm betting that many of you are old friends of Mark's. There's a few new to Mark's. Wow, welcome. So for those of you who might be new to Mark, I'll tell you a few things about Mark. Mark is the author of 9 published books and many more resources. And later in today's call, we'll tell you about how you can find all of those resources at leadeveryday.com. So for those of you who are new to Mark, the 9th book is called Win Every Day. And I've had the pleasure of working with Mark across many of his book launches over the years. Mark is a vice president at Chick-fil-A, and I can't keep up with your title. It's always changing. How about you tell it to us?
Today, the title is Vice President of High-Performance Leadership.
Perfect. Thank you. And Mark is the father of 2 boys, a husband to Donna for many years, and a granddad to 3 beautiful kids, grandkids. Anything else you want our crowd to know about you today, Mark?
Well, fundamentally, I sell chicken, and I have been on staff here at Chick-fil-A for almost 41 years. So I tell folks I'm thinking about a career. I just don't want to rush into anything. So been selling chicken for a long time.
Thank you so much, Mark. So as we dive in today, Win Every Day is the 5th book in the series of books that you've been writing on high performance leadership. I wonder, as we start our conversation, Mark, if you could tell those who are listening about how you got here to this 5th book, Win Every Day.
Well, the story actually began about 10 years ago. We were in a long-range strategic planning meeting, and we asked a question that I still love and use today. I don't know that I'd heard it before that meeting, but someone asked, what do we want to be true in a decade that's not true today? And one of the things I've learned is that regardless of how strategic you may be personally, is, the way you're wired. Some people are more strategic. Some people are more tactical or near term. good questions can help anyone think more strategically. And that's exactly what we were trying to do. And it was that question that sparked the journey that we're going to continue on through this webinar and share with you some of the things we've learned over that decade. But it does prompt a question for me. I wonder how many of the folks online work in an organization that they would consider strategic. Or maybe said better, how strategic is the organization that you work in?
Well,
How would you phrase that?
And we're going to launch a poll to find out from those who are attending today. So this poll says, on a scale of 1 to 5, how strategic is your organization? 1 being we're sporadic and reactive, it's a lot like playing checkers, and 5 being we're strategic and proactive, we're definitely playing chess. And that's a nod, obviously, Mark, to one of your books, Chess, Not Checkers. So we will give a few of you all of you a moment to answer that question. And thanks to those of you who are responding. If you happen to be calling in today and you don't have access to the poll, we would welcome you to give your comments in the chat as well, if you're able to access that.
So while people are completing that, let me speak to the chess, not checkers reference. When we asked that question 10 years ago, what do we want to be true in a decade that's not true today? We wanted to be more strategic, but not to be strategic for strategic sake. We wanted to be more thoughtful and proactive in creating the type of organization and culture that could ultimately excel at execution, could sustain elite levels of execution. That's what our guests expect. That's what our heart's desire is to provide for them. But we knew that if we weren't more thoughtful, if we weren't more proactive, if we weren't more strategic, we'd never get there. And so the work we did that we'll unpack here momentarily, we chose to create the metaphor of those more strategic, proactive, and thoughtful organizations characterized by the game of chess. And most of the world, quite honestly, in a more frenetic type of leadership where you're just reacting. And that to us was checkers. And we talked at length as we launched this content a decade ago that sometimes leaders kind of miss the clues, because the board, if you think about chess and checkers, the boards, they have the same number of squares. And it's like somebody sneaks in the middle of the night and they flip the board on you and you come back in and you're still playing checkers when the world demands chess. You say, well, wouldn't leaders know that? Because fundamentally, a checkerboard is red and black and a chessboard is black and white. And my deal is leaders can lose their perspective. In fact, they can become colorblind. And you literally can get caught in a firefighting, frenetic checkers world, and you're doing nothing to prepare for that future that you really desire a decade from now. So what does the poll tell us? Do we have some data?
We sure do. It looks like about only 12% of folks work in an organization that's playing chess. About the same number, 8% say they're playing checkers. So we have a lot of answers in the middle. It looks like people are being safe and choosing number 3, where the biggest number of our respondents.
Yeah. And the normal distribution curve tends to work out. So I'm not totally surprised by that. So I think regardless of where you are, I would make the case that the best organizations over time are more strategic. They play more chess than they play checkers. And so we wanted to learn, back to the original question, how did we get here? How did we get to book 5 in this high performance series? We said, we're going to go study the best organizations in the world to figure out what they have in common and how it might be transferable. And after a multi-year journey, it was 5 years before we actually published the book, Chess, Not Checkers, from when the work commenced. And we studied the Navy SEALs and world championship sailing teams and businesses that you would know and recognize if I shared their names, looking for those things that we found in all of them. And so we published that in 2015, as I said, under the title Chess, Not Checkers. Well, we believe and got feedback immediately from leaders, not just within our organization, but around the world, like, okay, this is good. it's good that you now know that these world-class organizations make 4 moves. We built it in a chess metaphor. They have 4 moves that they make, but we need more on each of those moves. And so that became the 4 subsequent books, including the one we're about to launch. So let me give you a quick flyby, and there may be questions that people would have we could address later. The 4 moves that we discovered in all high-performance organizations, they bet on leadership. We cannot find a high-performance organization in the world that's not well-led. If there's some out there, we'd love to study them. I would argue there would be an anomaly. High-performance organizations are well-led. Secondly, they act as one. There's an alignment that is, it's hard to describe because it almost defies logic, that whether you have 5 people, 50 people, 500 people, 5,000 people, 50,000 people, the best organizations, those men and women are aligned. Third, these organizations win the heart, which is really about engagement. And for those in this field, those on this call, this webinar, they know engagement has been in vogue probably for 15 years, since our friend Marcus Buckingham began to talk about that. But engagement's always been important. And we find that it is a priority in high-performance organizations because you can't deliver the levels of performance and execution that you want if your people don't care. And at the end of the day, we say engagement is about how much somebody really cares about their work, their coworkers, and their organization. And if an organization is well led, people are aligned, and they're engaged, they really care, that positions you to excel at execution. And that is the hallmark of all great organizations. They deliver what they promise consistently. And so the way we got to the 5th book is we have done books now on each of these 4 moves. Leaders Made Here, Talent Magnet, Win the Heart, and the one about to come out is Win Every Day. So long answer to your question, but it's been a long journey. 10 years of research and validation, and we're excited about where we are. And I'll talk more about that later.
Sure. Well, so let's take a step back, Mark, and could you define for those of us who are listening how you would identify a high-performance organization and what's different about them? You did touch on that some with outlining the 4 moves, but I would love to hear a bit more. How do you define a high-performance organization? Is that about revenue?
Great question. And it's a really, really, really hard question. So the team that worked on this and has worked on it for a long, long time, we struggled with that early. And I would argue that we never really solved it. So stay with me. I'm not trying to bail on your question, because different leaders in different organizations, in different contexts and different circumstances are going to define that differently. But we couldn't pursue something we couldn't articulate. So we did come up with a way to answer the question. So I'll share a short story with the audience here, and it's our current best thinking on what a high-performance organization is. So imagine a new leader going into an organization, and just go with me here and pretend that we've given that leader a very large rope that's about 40 feet long. And as soon as that leader shows up, he or she is going to get on one end, and their team is going to get on the other end, and they're going to begin a tug of war. Now you're thinking, well, that's crazy. That makes no sense at all. Well, I agree, and that's actually what happens. Let's think about it in a Chick-fil-A context. When a new restaurant operator goes in, he's trying to get these young people to say my pleasure, and they're saying whatever. And we're trying to get them to wear their name badge, and they're saying I lost it. You see, and there's this tension, and there's this struggle, but fundamentally the leader's pulling against the team. Now, a great leader can do that with some success for a season, but then they're actually going to get tired, and they're going to realize they're not making a lot of progress. So what often happens is a leader will recruit a leadership team, and the leadership team are 4 to 6 individuals that will join them on their side of the rope. Now, there's still a fundamental problem. It's easier for the leader. They have more leadership capacity now, but they're still pulling against their team. And it's like, use the holding system. It's like, it's too complicated. And you need to do table touch-ins. I don't even like customers. And you can see whatever the language is, there's still a fundamental problem, even though the leader's life is easier, feels easier, because they've got some help. That's not a high-performance organization. A high-performance organization is one in which you get everyone on one side of the rope. You're still in a tug of war, though. So what's that mean? Well, now you're pulling against your competition and towards your goals. So what we were trying to discern is, let's study organizations that have gotten everyone on one side of the rope pulling in the same direction. And the potential is mind-boggling. It's just mind-boggling. Because
that's such a powerful picture. I'm wondering if people are envisioning that with me.
Yeah, and I can think about the times in my life, and this was all on me, particularly when I was a young leader, I was pulling against my team. And that is so crazy. But, there are a lot of senior leaders that are pulling against their team. And so we said, how do you get them on the same side? Well, you bet on leadership. You act as one. You win the heart. Therefore, you're able to excel at execution. So those are the elements that enable you to bring people over. And when you bring them over, you have, in fact, created a high-performance organization.
So it's those 4 moves that the 4 books address that set high-performance leader organizations apart and drive those greater results that we're all looking for.
Right. And so this book, because we were doing a deep dive on each of the moves, when we came to this idea of excel at execution, we said, okay, let's go again, repeat the methodology. Let's study the best organizations in the world. Oh, by the way, we validated what I just shared, even though that was not the objective. We found these things to be true, even when we said, let's just go focus on the folks that excel at execution. They do the other 3 moves. We said, yes, but are there specific practices? Are there specific principles of execution that we could learn and share? And that's actually what this book's about.
So I have a question here from Taylor that seems appropriate in this moment, Mark. She wonders practically how you make that happen. How do you get all the people in the organization on the same side of the rope, pulling in the same direction?
Well, that's a big question, Taylor. Goodness gracious. So it starts with a picture of the future. It starts with vision. It starts with leadership. And I'm not trying to put you on the spot, Taylor. You may or may not be the point leader, but no organization that I've ever met has drifted to high performance. It's a conscious, strategic leadership decision, which is why I was interested. How many of your organizations do you feel are strategic? Maybe they are in some areas and not in others. But if you want to become a high-performance organization, it always begins with a leader saying, we want to become a high-performance organization. And then, of course, what we believe we have discovered, we didn't create anything here, what we've discovered is there are 4 moves that will enable you to do that. So really quick, you have to bet on leadership, right? And we've identified best practices that what that means. It means things such as leaders have to set the pace. Leaders have to grow a leadership team to create capacity. They don't have to, but it's a best practice. Leaders build the bench, because as you have leadership turnover, or as your business and enterprise expands, you need more leaders. So those are some practices under that. You've then got to act as one. The leaders have to create clarity so that you can create alignment. Clarity on what? You get to decide. Some are really clear on vision, some on mission, some on strategy, some on values, some on a combination of those things. But what is unmistakable is all high-performance organizations are aligned on some things. So you see, it's a journey. You have to then ensure that the people are fully engaged. Well, how do you do that? That's complicated, right? It takes a lot of time, takes a lot of energy, but we wrote a book on that called Win the Heart, and it includes strategies and tactics for raising the engagement level of your people. And so, again, this is a never-ending project that a leader would walk into saying, yes, I'm committing to build this type of organization. And then you got to roll up your sleeves. It's the blocking and tackling. You got to get in the trenches, and you got to do these things to over time shape and change the culture. So I know that's a mouthful, but that was a huge, huge, huge question.
It,
We've
it
written 5 books
was.
on how to do that. So it's not something you'll do this week or next week. It's something you could begin today, but you'll work on it forever.
That's really helpful. So, Mark, I know you talked a bit about the research that you and the team at Chick-fil-A did to identify these 4 moves. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you discovered these specific actions to be the most critical and common among the world's best organizations?
Well, we started with a literature review, and we try to learn from others first on this Win Every Day project. The summary, we partnered with Stanford University, and their team came back with a summary of over 200 pages of what the world knows on execution. So like that was helpful and not helpful, right? I mean, we sell chicken. This has got to be something we can embrace, something we can make approachable, something we can communicate and convey to large numbers of people. In our case, the restaurant operators employ in a year 250,000 team members, and 70% of them are teenagers, which is kind of another mind-boggling statistic. But it's not uncommon on this journey for us to go out and do that type of research. Then we began looking at world-class organizations. I've mentioned some of those already. On the execution work specifically, we spent time with Apple, Starbucks, Cirque du Soleil, Mayo Clinic, Southwest Airlines, again, another dozen beyond that, trying to discern what is it that they do. And then honestly, we spent quite a bit of time with some of the top performers within Chick-fil-A. And so it's a process. We're actually working on some research now for a 2022 project. And I was with the team yesterday and I said, we're in the messy middle because we're learning all of this and we're just trying to sift and trying to sort and trying to synthesize and go, what is true and what is relevant and what is applicable, and how do we then even put that in language that is approachable? And so the process is a multi-year venture. If we could do it faster, we would, but it's a lot of work, and we're excited to do it because it serves us and it serves leaders around the world. But we're on 3 to 5 year cycles to create these resources per resource.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, so Mark, let's talk for a moment about how betting on leadership is different than just, everyday leadership that's required to run an organization.
Okay. I believe that there is something that every organization needs more than leadership. Does that
Wow,
surprise you?
okay.
Yes.
Yeah, keep going.
Yeah. They need a leadership culture. And a leadership culture is a place where leaders are routinely and systematically developed, and you have a surplus. So here's the scenario. Again, I've only been working for 40 years. Others may have different experiences, and I've worked in only one company, so I can't speak to the entire world. But here's what I have seen in our organization and in others. When you have a problem to solve or an opportunity to seize, what most organizations do is they put a leader on it. Well, that's where we were a decade ago. We didn't have a sufficient leadership bench. We had problems to be solved and opportunities to be seized. And we looked over our shoulder and said, we hope this person will be ready in a year or two. And we think this person might be able to lead someday. And of course, what do you do in those kind of situations? You heap more on your existing leaders. Well, that might work in the short term, but it will not work in the long term. And so we believe that a bet on leadership is really a commitment to build a leadership culture. At the same time, you have to continue to grow leadership capacity. And I mentioned one strategy for that is building a leadership team, because no matter how smart and talented and gifted a particular leader is, you put 5 or 6 leaders around that leader and their leadership capacity goes way up. And so bet on leadership is more than just an individual leader leading a function or a team. It's more systemic than that.
Sure, that's really helpful. And so I'm wondering, Mark, assuming that almost every leader of every organization would want to execute well, so which of the three preceding steps to organizations struggle with the most in what you've observed, of win the heart,
Yeah.
bet on leadership. People were asking for a review on this, and thank you to those who put it in the chat, because I can't really type well and listen well at the same time. ACT is one. Of those three, which do you see organizations struggling with?
Well, I don't want to be pessimistic, but I see organizations struggling with all of it. I mean, I've met leaders that said, we just want to focus on execution. And I always say, good luck with that. That's like the gymnast that says, I just want to do the dismount. It's like, where do you get the height, the energy, and momentum to stick the landing? It's in the routine that precedes the dismount. Where do you get the height, the momentum, and the energy to excel at execution? It's in the routine that precedes the dismount. Again, the only of those three that we have any quantifiable data on is the work that Gallup does every year, where they say about 70% of the American workforce is not engaged at work. I mean, get your head around that. 7 out of 10 people don't care. So how in the world would you ever, I mean, it's a delusion that you would excel at execution. Think about if you had 10 people doing work and 7 don't care, is excellence even a possibility? It's like, absolutely not. So we have data that says American leaders struggle with that. And by the way, a lot of times you'll see articles written about the sorry state of the American worker after Gallup produces that. And I've actually written about that. And I said, no, that's a reflection on leadership. Leaders create the condition in which people are either engaged or disengaged. And so that's an indictment on leadership. So we've got data to say a lot of people struggle with that. I would say that fundamentally that goes back to a leadership challenge, right? And you've got a lot of leaders that are heads down, near-term thinking. Honestly, they're probably managing more than they're leading. They're trying to control rather than change or grow or enhance. And they're not thinking systemically. They're not thinking strategically, which means they probably don't have people aligned very well. And if you want to test alignment, because I don't know how good it is in your organization, we got 500 people online. Some of them may be perfectly aligned. But if you want to test this, you can do, I'll give you 2 options. One is an old school method, and one is more modern. The old school method is at your next leadership team meeting or meeting of your team, any group you're with, pass out a 3x5 card and ask them one question. And you get to pick. What's most important around here? What's our number one goal? What's our number one priority? What's our mission? What's our purpose? Pick something and then take the cards up and see if they all have the same answer. Now, if you want a modern version of that, you can text 3 members of your team and ask them any one of those questions and ask them to text back to you. We tried this at one of our events. We had a leader on stage talking to about 500 of our leaders and said, text 3 of your team right now and ask them, what's our number one priority for the year? And so, everybody pulled out their phones and did it. And this leader leaned over and said, look at that. They're all identical. It's like, well, great. And she said, no, because they're wrong.
Oh, no.
They're actually perfectly aligned on the wrong thing, which I would tell you is not alignment at all, right? So I think organizations struggle with a lot of this without strategic intent. It goes back to the question a moment ago. Where does this journey begin? It's with a leader deciding we're going to build a high-performance organization. These are the 4 primary moves or 4 primary strategies, and we're gonna get after it, and we're gonna decide what are we going to align around, and we're going to begin doing the tactical things to align, and we're going to test for engagement and begin doing the tactical things necessary to raise people's level of engagement, and so forth and so on.
So as I listen to you, Mark, obviously I'm filtering this all through the organization that I'm leading, and I imagine those who are listening are doing the same thing. I'm really curious, where on earth, if someone is listening, do you start? Because, there's a lot of steps. You say it's a long-term process. So, if I'm a leader listening today, where should I start on that list of 4 things to do? Bet on leadership, act as one, win the heart, or excel at execution?
I think the starting point I'm sorry, I'm going to repeat myself. Something I said a minute ago, I think I've already said it twice, is the leader has to decide, we want to build a high performance organization. It everything we're talking about, everything I've written about is contingent upon a leader's decision. You cannot drift to high performance. You have to decide, we're going to do this. That's where you start. Then, very practically, I would suggest, if you have a leadership team, you might bring that leadership team together. And by the way, this is not my idea. I've gotten this from many, many leaders who've shared this with me, and I think it's brilliant, so I'm going to give them full credit. Once they understood the 4 moves, the leader, they brought their leadership team together and said, this is our job description for the leadership team. We're going to bet on leadership. We're going to ensure alignment. We're going to ensure engagement, and we are going to focus appropriate time, energy, and effort on execution. And so all of a sudden, you're not trying to do this by yourself. I've started saying recently, it's not lonely at the top if you take people with you.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you can't do this by yourself. The magic is in the masses. The way this works is when you get everybody on your side of the road. But I would start with a nucleus of 4 to 6 men and women, and you say, this is the play we're going to run. And then you just have to get on it, and you have to say, okay, what do I need to do? You know, our first best practice on Bet on Leadership is set the pace. Am I learning and growing? Do I have the moral authority to encourage others to learn and grow? I mean, that's kind of a personal place to start, but people always watch the leader. So there's a lot of very tactical things you can do, but it all hinges on a decision.
So, and you call out there, Mark, that this is a theme that we've been repeating. So in order to become a high performance organization, you first have to decide, the leader has to decide to become a high performance organization. So let's shift for a moment and talk about this topic of employee engagement. Can you talk a little bit, Mark, and share with us how we might go about engaging an employee who might not be performing well?
Well, again, that's a huge question. Let me see if I can give you a couple of very practical and tactical things that you might do. Mm-hmm. One of the core tenets that we believe drives engagement is the connection that individual has with their organization, with their coworkers, with their supervisor. That connection is the gateway to engagement, right? Mm-hmm. You're not going to care about something or an organization if you don't feel connected to it. And so I think, as crazy as this sounds, real conversations are a great way to start building connections. Open-ended questions, purposeful time where a leader or leaders, because again, I'm not trying to put all this on the senior leader. I think the senior leader who wants to build a high performance organization better deputize all the other leaders, because you're not going to do this by yourself. In fact, you shouldn't do it yourself because it's not your job, right? It's not your job to do their job. It's not their job to do your job. So if you've got leaders in your organization, that you're encouraging them to have real conversations with people about hopes and dreams and aspirations and fears and concerns and, the fit for their role, just real conversations. And I know that doesn't sound sexy and it doesn't sound complicated, but a lot of leaders, if you look at your calendar and you try to reflect on how much time did I spend in non-agenda driven conversations with individuals in the last week or the last month. Connections can be born, they can be hatched, if you will, in real conversations. So let me give you one more that is probably even more crazy for some folks. And that's give people real responsibility. Think about a time in your life that somebody gave you responsibility for something, an outcome, a decision, whatever, but that you own this. Mm-hmm. Just think, what happened to your sense of engagement? How much Did your care factor go up because of that ownership? You know, I still meet far too many leaders that they may delegate tasks, but they don't really share responsibility. And I'm not saying you shouldn't delegate tasks. I mean, delegation is a great tool in a leader's toolbox, but don't confuse that with sharing responsibility. But
That
you
makes
share
sense.
real responsibility and people will care more.
Well, Mark, can we circle back to what you were saying earlier? You were challenging us to take a look at our calendars and think about how much of our time is spent in real conversation that isn't driven by an agenda. Do you have any idea, like a benchmark, or how much time would a leader aspire to be spending in
Yeah,
those
I have no
real
idea. I
conversations?
have no idea.
No.
But it is a direct reflection, I think, of several things. I will give you some parameters to think within. How many direct reports do you have? Because some people have one and some people have 40. That's gonna matter.
Hmm.
What is your current level of relationship with those men and women? I believe that it takes more time and investment when there is no relationship than to maintain one. So those are some factors that would influence that. And by the way, I don't believe all of those conversations actually have to occur one-on-one. In teams that I've led over decades, we actually do some of that connection time. We call it community building in
Hmm.
every meeting. It may only be 10 minutes, but there are other ways beyond one-on-one for the leader that goes, well, there's no way I don't have any discretionary time in my calendar. Again, that's another conversation for another day. But can you build some connection time into the activities you're already doing? And then last but not least, connection can also happen outside the workplace. And there are any number of ways that you can do that, whether it's through, notes or cards or social events or activities. I have leaders I know, and I've done this myself. I will go to sporting events of people whose kids, people on my team's children, I'll go to their sporting events. And
Hmm.
you can build some connection that way, right? Because you want to do life with these people. A lot of things you can do to build connection that will in turn lift engagement.
That's really helpful, Mark. So I'm curious if you can share any examples or stories from Chick-fil-A. And there was actually a really interesting question earlier from my friend Jeff, who's on the call today. He was really struck by your comment on the number of young first-time workers in the Chick-fil-A restaurants. And with all this being written and said about generational differences, he's curious how that's playing out for you.
Well, I think it's playing out pretty well. I don't want to overstate that, but we do have the opportunity to influence, again, however many that is, help me with the math, 180,000, teenagers every year. And
Mhm.
so that is a strategy that our operators have chosen. I don't know if all of the listeners understand that our restaurants are independently operated. And so we have a leader in each restaurant, and management and leadership practices are at the sole discretion of that independent operator. However, the majority of them have chosen to use young people. They love the energy. They love the dynamic of having those folks in the restaurant. And again, I think it's working out well. I will say this, some of the preliminary research that I've seen on the centennials, and I know many of your audience have probably either encountered them or are aware of them. They're now the real teenagers. We tend to think, some people think millennials are the teenagers. No, the millennials have moved past that. This next group are centennials. And the early research on them is there are some similarities to the millennials, but they want more structure and they want more coaching and they want more training. They don't want to make some of the mistakes that they saw their older brothers and sisters make. So I
Hmm.
think that could be good. It puts a greater burden on leaders, more systems, more structure, more training. But I think you'll find them eager to work within the boundaries and parameters they're given. They have a high uh, desire for success, but unlike some of the millennials, they're not as likely to move. They're not as likely to jump. At least that's some of the preliminary data that we're looking at, because they've seen that that hasn't always worked out for the millennials that are still jumping and moving and still, you know, living in the basement or whatever they're doing. They don't, they're thinking, no, tell me what's required, what's expected. And that's just some of the early data that we're seeing.
That's really interesting. And I think, Mark, you're the first person I've ever heard use that phrase, centennial. So that would be people who are teenagers now, my kids.
That's right.
All right. So thank you. So I have a comment from Tim, and he said, this is a great discussion, but we're really interested to discover what the material is in the new book. Tim, you're going to need to come back to one of the other webinars in the series where we're going to be diving into the new book. Good news, bad news, right? We're going to dive into the new book on the next webinar.
Do you want to give them any of it?
Yeah, we can give them some of it. Let's give people a brief overview. We have some time.
Well, again, I don't want to do too much here, but we did say this was about win every day. And let me say this for people that wonder, why in the world would we have spent this time talking about really the chestnut checkers content, the high performance organization context? Because it works together. And that is the risk. And I tried to explain this in the introduction to the new book. It's like there is value. There are principles and practices we discovered about execution, and delighted to share them. But if you ignore these other moves, it's not going to work. So think about an Olympic athlete that says, okay, if I want to make it, you know, and win a gold medal, I've got to rest, I've got to exercise, and I've got to do the diet. I'm oversimplifying. And they say, well, you know what? I'm just going to do the diet and see if I can be an Olympian. Well, no, it kind of works together. And so I think this webinar was a chance to remind leaders to excel at execution. I mean, just think about it this way. How many organizations do you know that consistently excel at execution? I've actually done this activity with hundreds of leaders, and most people, most humans, you can probably name 5 or 6 or 8 organizations that consistently excel at execution. We'll let that sit for just a second. You know hundreds of organizations. Like, why is this so rare? Because it's really hard, and most don't invest the time, energy, and effort and have the discipline to do the diet, the exercise, and the rest, right? And a lot of people are looking for a shortcut. And so for people who get this book and think it's the shortcut, it's actually not. It's not going to give you sustained elite performance. But that's why we've spent so much time, and we will go deeper in future webinars. But let me give you a taste of this. And I referenced it when we talked about our definition of high performance. It's getting everybody on one side of the rope. I said the magic is in the masses. Again, another example, you think about a football team with 11 people on the field. Let's think it's you have the ball. It's like, how many of them need to execute their assigned responsibility for that play to be successful? You think
all 11.
Right? One person blows a block, or somebody doesn't run the right route, or the quarterback turns the wrong way, the play doesn't work. So our first fundamental, we discovered 3 fundamentals on this journey. And the language we've chosen, and this is not for leaders, this is for the masses, that if you want to excel at execution and you want to use the strategy that we've articulated here, the first step is to convince everyone in your organization to pursue mastery. Well, why everyone? Back to the football example. How many people do you not want making their block or running their route or doing their assignment? And we stumbled upon this. I say stumbled upon it. It began to pop up in all these different places. And one of the guys on our team is the sports psychologist for Clemson football. Now, I don't know if you're a Clemson fan or not. Many people aren't, but they execute pretty well. I mean, they execute really well. And so this guy was on our team helping us figure out, not only sharing best practices from them, but helping us look at this topic much, much bigger. And he said, it is impossible. And I probably need to think of a better way to say this, but he said, it is impossible to execute at the level you're aspiring to without individual commitment. It's almost like you can't build a high-performance organization without a leader deciding we're going to do it. You can't really excel at execution. You can't really win every day if the individuals on your team aren't pursuing mastery. They have to want to make the block. They have to want to run the route, and they have to try every time. Some of the language we use in the book and in our training is the goal here is to do the right thing the right way every time. The goal is to do the right thing the right way every time. Now, I don't know how that strikes you or people listening. I've had a wide array of responses to that. The first response that I get most often, if we had time, we'd do a poll, but here's what I get most often. That is an unrealistic expectation. And I said, exactly, which is why it's not an expectation. It's a goal. It's a goal.
That's a really great distinction, Mark.
It's like, wouldn't you want to try to do it right every time? Now, you're human. I'm human. We're not going to do it right every time. But that's a pretty good goal. And what we find, and the psychologist has helped us understand, that lofty goals inspire people, whereas expectations, particularly ones that are unachievable, they beat people down. So that first step is to enroll your people, to enlist your people, to encourage and inspire and enlist your people to say, will you pursue mastery? Oh, by the way, we will help you. We will train you. We will coach you. We will encourage you. We'll celebrate you. But will you pursue mastery? And if you can't get past that one, then the number 2 and number 3 fundamentals are irrelevant, because, again, if any number of players don't do what they're supposed to do, you're just not going to have a successful play. And oh, by the way, you're not going to excel at execution. You're not going to win every day.
Well, so Mark, as you're talking, it occurs to me how important and critical those other pieces are, because if you don't have engagement and people don't care, they're not going to be enlisted to pursue mastery.
So let me tell you a quick story about that. We have tested this content now in about 70 Chick-fil-A restaurants over a 2-year period. And maybe we'll talk more about that in a future webinar. But to your point specifically, I visited probably, 30 of 40 of those restaurants myself. And one of the things I would always try to do is sit down with the leadership team and say, what advice do you have for other leaders around the world? Don't think Chick-fil-A. Other leaders who are trying to excel at execution, leaders that are trying to win every day. And I'll never forget, I had a young man. He may not have been a teenager, but he was barely 20, right? This is a young leader on this leadership team. And he said, well, I've just got one thing for you. And I'm like, okay, what is it? What is it? What is it? He said, if your people don't care, you can forget execution. And I said, well, okay, great. Thanks. Tell me more about that. He said, we found we had some people just didn't care. I said, and? He said, and they don't work here anymore. You think about it. I know that may sound harsh and cruel, but if you're a coach and you've got players who actually don't want to run the plays that you've called, at some point, they probably can't be on your team. Because if they don't care, you can't excel at execution. You can't win every day. And that was actually a theme that I heard probably in 20, 30, 40% of the restaurants that I visited, where they had lost team members or team leaders who actually did not want to win every day. They had I'm not in any way trying to be critical, but just their temperament, wiring, bias was good enough is good enough. And it's like, that's not the culture we're going to create here. And so I've seen a growing number of leaders in our pilot have actually changed their selection criteria, and they're asking questions in the interview to judge someone's openness to such a lofty goal. And if people are put off upon, right out of the chute and going, I don't want any part of that, well, it's better to know that before you actually add them to your payroll.
Certainly so. So do you have any of those questions that a leader might ask to identify people's openness to such a lofty goal?
We've not worked on that. And in part because management and leadership practices are at the sole discretion of an independent operator. So we legally are not allowed to give them interview questions. And so maybe that's something I can do for a broader audience and do a blog post at some point in the future. But we've actually not done that work.
Sure, no worries. So there have been lots of questions and comments coming in on the chat. And Mark, we, of course, will share those with you after today's event. And I'm trying to figure out which of these we have still time to address. I saw a question related to this topic of engagement. And Richard was wondering, in your research, how do most companies measure engagement? Do you have any insight into that?
I don't know if it's an insight. What I would say is most companies don't measure it. And as a result, most leaders have an overinflated opinion as to how engaged their people are, which is one reason I think it's often neglected, is that leaders will assume that it's much higher than it is. And again, Gallup's been doing this research, I don't know, for 40 years. And I'm not saying there aren't outliers, but when they do national studies, 7 out of 10 are not engaged. But my experience is most leaders do not measure that.
And there was a comment earlier in the webinar about the international statistics around engagement. Mark, are you aware of those? I can't verify it, but one of the intelligent people on this call said it's about 15% outside the US.
Okay. All right. I don't know those numbers. Now I do. Let me say that I'm gonna move forward just for a second. I know you've got another question or two. Just for those that may not be able to attend future webinars, we're going to give you some resources that'll help you. But for those that really just need to know, the second fundamental, the first fundamental is pursue mastery. The second fundamental is own the numbers. And there's a lot to be said about that. But individual members of the team have to own the numbers. And there's a lot to be said about which numbers and what does ownership mean. But they actually have to care about the score in order to impact the score. And then finally, the third fundamental is help others win. And this turned out to be staggeringly important. And we weren't sure when we went into this. This is when the focus of this effort shifts from me to we, because you're making a commitment that you're going to pursue mastery. You're making a commitment to own the numbers. And guess what? We're all making a commitment to help each other win. And that can be through encouragement, that can be through accountability, that can be through training, that can be through physical assistance. And we have seen that just set some cultures on fire, and performance has just skyrocketed. We had an app, we're still prototyping, but at the end of each shift, people had the opportunity to record how they had helped someone win during the day. And in 30 restaurants, we had 40,000 of those in the first 90 days.
Wow.
People said that and then I had one young lady came in and she said, this has changed my life and my view of work forever. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, I come in looking to help others win. I said, why? She said, don't you know about this app? They ask us every day and I don't want to not have an answer. So we literally have cultures that have said, okay, part of my job description now, it's not just to pursue mastery and own the numbers, which feels kind of individual, but I'm making a commitment to help others win. And that has really been a turbocharger on this. So for those that were texting in and chatting in that we have to know the three fundamentals, that's what they are. I will give you a teaser though, because I know we're about out of time. We also discovered some things that leaders can do to accelerate the journey. We're not going to talk about those till a future webinar.
All right. Well, Mark, thank you for sharing those fundamentals with us. I know we're all excited to learn from you more in the upcoming webinars. So there will be a follow-up email to today's event. We will have the registration links for the second and third webinars. The second webinar is actually happening, Mark, during the week that your book launches. So the book launches on March 10th. Our second webinar is on March 13th. So if you've enjoyed today's content, we definitely want to make sure that you sign up for the next event on March 13th. And for today, we have a few key calls to action and resources available to you. you. The first one is to go and pre-order Win Every Day, which you can do on Amazon. We'll put that link in the chat and also in the follow-up email. The second thing is we want to invite you to get a free preview of the book. So those of you who have been asking to hear about what's in the new book, you can get a free preview of the book by texting the words Win Every Day to the number 33777. Now, in the event that you are calling in today from Canada or somewhere else around the world, that text functionality will not work for you. However, you can go to wineverydaybook.com where you can also download a free preview of the book. And the other thing that we want to make sure that you know about is that Mark has information about all the books at tmarkmiller.com. And you can also follow Mark on Instagram at tmarkmiller.com. Mark, are there any additional resources that you want to let folks know about today before we wrap up our hour together?
Yeah, I want to back up half a step. We've changed the Instagram. It's high
That is
performance
right.
leaders.
Oh my goodness, I'm so
Performance leaders.
sorry.
That's fine. That's
That has
fine.
not sunk in with me yet, Mark.
Well, it's new. It's fresh. I'm surprised it sunk in with me. Yeah, one more thing. People have expressed interest in some of the what I would consider supplemental resources. We've created field guides, quick start guides, assessments, and videos, and those are things that are not available currently on Amazon. So we created a site called leadeveryday.com. And on leadeveryday.com, again, not only all the books, which you can buy anywhere, but field guides, quick start guides, videos, and assessments. And so if that would serve you, I would encourage you to check it out.
Fantastic. So I do have a question again from someone in Canada. The way that someone in Canada can get the free preview of the book is by going to wineverydaybook.com and you'll find a preview to the new book there. Mark, thank you so much for investing your energy. I feel like, you know, I've been exposed to your content for years. I learn from you every time. It's exceedingly valuable. And so I thank you for sharing your wisdom with us today, Mark.
Thank you.
See you next time.
All right, bye-bye.